Now on Islam Channel, The Report.
Good evening and welcome to The Report with me, John Rees. In tonight's programme we'll be looking at the impending inauguration of Donald Trump. Our story comes from Michigan, where minorities, especially Muslims and immigrants, are fearful of a renewed wave of hate crimes. We'll also be looking at the outrage in South Africa after the visit to Israel by the main opposition leader. But first, the foreign ministers of the United Kingdom, Turkey and Greece have all travelled to the UN headquarters in Geneva. They're joining talks over a potential reunification deal for Cyprus just as they reach a crucial stage. But after more than 40 years of division, many contentious issues remain. Nathaniel Amos Sansom has this report.
Between two checkpoints in Europe's last divided capital, Bicommunal Cultural Centre provides a venue for Greek and Turkish Cypriots to overcome their difficulties and dream of a shared future, with Turkish and Greek language classes aiming to help bring the two communities together. The venue's location in the no man's land in Nicosia, with the centre being inspired by teachers from both sides who want to foster a greater knowledge and understanding between the cultures. Meanwhile, in Geneva,
Home for Cooperation is located in the buffer zone, which people from both communities can actually access, because there are people living on both sides who cannot pass the borders, but they can come up to this point. So it's easier for people to come here for activities, for workshops. That's why having a language workshop or other workshops at the buffer zone is more convenient for everyone.
I'm a Greek-speaking Cypriot. I live in the south, although my origin is from the north of the island. And I think that we should stop making the separation between Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots, because we are just Greek-speaking Cypriots and Turkish-speaking Cypriots. We are all Cypriots, and this is very important.
A potentially historic scene as the heads of both the Turkish and Greek sides of the island meet for face-to-face talks about reunification. The Greek president, Nikos Anastasiades, and the Turkish Cypriots leader, Mustafa Akinci, have negotiated for more than 18 months in the run-up to the talks and arrived separately at the Geneva headquarters earlier this week. Many discussions have failed in the past few decades of negotiation efforts. And while these are said to be the most serious talks between both sides in over a decade, initial expectations were dampened down. However, the new UN Secretary-General, who arrived for the talks along with representatives from the guarantor nations of Turkey, Greece and the United Kingdom, has said that enormous progress has been made.
Many proposals were put on the table. Time will decide whether they are solid or not. But the question is very simple. We are working hard to have a settlement that addresses the central questions that have been discussed for a long time in relation to territory, in relation to property, in relation to relations with the EU, in relation to foreign policy, in relation to all the aspects. And an enormous progress was made in all those dossiers.
Cyprus has been divided since 1974 in response to an Athens-inspired coup that was seeking a union of the island with Greece. Years of inter-community violence, which culminated with the Turkish invasion and subsequent declaration of a republic on Cyprus's northern third, saw thousands from both sides flee their homes, and many remain displaced to this day. It has always been agreed in the run-up to negotiations that some of the territory currently controlled by the Turkish Cypriots would have to be ceded to Greek Cypriot control in any deal. Just how much and which land they should give up has always hampered the 4 decades of negotiations. With this and other issues involving security, the future role of Turkish troops in the north, and the status of any European Union membership in a reunited Cyprus, the formal talks are likely to continue for some time. Nathaniel Amos Sansom, The Report.
Now, joining me to discuss this from the Greek Cypriot side is Dr. Nikos Anastasiou, who's an academic director of the Inter-Napa College. And he's also one of the co-founders of the Cyprus Academic Dialogue, a group which aims to bring together academics across the island to contribute towards reunification. Welcome to the programme. Dr. Anastasiou, tell us about, first of all, the kind of civic programmes of which you've been a part, which have attempted to move towards a situation where reunification can become a reality?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Cyprus Academic Dialogue is a bi-communal organisation, so I talk mainly for both communities, but obviously I'm a Greek Cypriot. We've been working together for about 8 years now as a bi-communal group. We've done a lot of workshops in Cyprus, quite a few in Cyprus, basically trying to brainstorm ideas that, trying to get ideas out for some of the sticking points of the solution. These ideas we've published, we've given them to the leaders. We've done a lot of talking together. We've been abroad. We've been to Turkey 3 times, met academics, intellectuals, key figures in Turkey. We were the first NGO to have a conference in Ankara where the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Turkey was there. So we've been getting a lot of people together who are interested in a solution, basically, and preparing proposals to help that idea. In many ways, I think, because we're a bi-communal organisation, we understand what both communities want, and it's easier for us to speak to politicians on both sides on what might be acceptable. So I think that is often useful. Our workshops have brought many academics and intellectuals together, and I think we're regarded as a good, impartial viewpoint, and we try and help the leaders as much as we can.
And tell us about the Cyprus Friendship Programme, which you've been involved in, which pairs students across the divide, doesn't it?
My friend, that's another Nikos Anastasiou, unfortunately.
Right.
As far as I know, the Cyprus Friendship Programme has been working with a lot of young people, children basically, trying to get them to play sport together, basketball. I think they've been to the US on several programs, but it's not what I've been involved in. That's another Nikos Anastasiou.
Okay. Well, just give us some sense then of how much you think these kind of programs have contributed to a mood where, well, even if these set of negotiations don't work, it looks as if they've got further than any previous ones.
Yeah. How much our contribution has made,
yes,
yes,
indeed, those kind of civic society programmes, how essential have they been in providing a context for these national talks?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, because NGOs, intellectuals are often a small number of people, and in many ways we still are a small number of people. We have quite a few members, but impacting society is a much harder thing to do. I think it's interesting that when we started working together as a bi-communal organisation, there was a lot of uncertainty about what we were doing from both communities, often labelling us as traitors and that kind of thing, the kind of labels that do get thrown around. So that was the initial impact, and a lot of people weren't sure if this was a good idea, whether it would be accepted. From there, from working together, from meeting politicians, meeting diplomats, nowadays, people are asking us what we're doing next. I think people trust us, and people are asking about our activities. People want to know what we're doing. People want to know what the leaders are doing, because we have some information about what's going on. I wouldn't say that we've reached broader society, but I think our opinions are listened to, and we also listen to opinions, and we pass that on to the leaders and the other politicians that might be interested.
Well, let's have a talk now about what the politicians are doing. Many people seem to be optimistic about these talks. Earlier in the week we covered them, and we said if the foreign ministers started turning up in Geneva, that would be a sign that they were moving forward. Is that how you look at it?
Well, optimism is a strange word. There's a lot to be done. The bulk of the work has been done, but the key parts are left out. That's what they're doing at the moment. That's what they've been doing in Geneva. I feel that it's all there, and what's left is political decision-making.
When you say
very difficult parts are the ones that haven't been decided yet.
And what are they? When you say some difficult parts have been left out, what are they? What is still to be decided? What's still holding things up?
Well, property, as you know, there was a lot of displaced persons in Cyprus in 1974. Territorial adjustments is difficult. Security and guarantees, what they were discussing yesterday. Rotating presidencies is a key issue. I think these are the most difficult ones in terms of the decisions that need to be made. People are saying no on both sides, politicians, but they will have to be concessions from both communities to reach an agreement. I think the two leaders are trying to reach an agreement that will be acceptable to both sides, if that's possible. They're not trying to satisfy just themselves. They realise that it's no use. We had that in 2004 when one community voted yes and the other didn't. I think they're trying to get an agreement that will be supported by both communities. That is a very difficult tightrope to walk, but that's what they're trying to do. But as I say, they've still got the difficult parts to do now.
And that agreement has to be one that's convincing for both sides, because at the end of this process, if there is a deal, it has to go to a referendum in both communities.
Yeah, that's a dirty word, isn't it?
The difficult one.
There's two or three things here, basically. A, we've got to reach an agreement between the political leaders. That's what's happening now. Hopefully that will happen in the next few weeks. Secondly, we've got to go through referendums. And we've all lived difficult elections lately. You guys in Britain, the US elections recently. It's very difficult to get things through to society now. It's very difficult it's very easy to frighten people. It's very easy to create slogans and fake news, as a popular guy often talks about. These are very, very big challenges. We decided on referendums a few years ago, and now I think people are realizing the challenge of that. So first of all, it's the agreement of the two politicians. Then we need to work on the referendums. Hopefully, if the two leaders agree, if the guarantors agree, this will be a stimulus to society that this is the best solution for Cyprus. And if we get that through, then we've really got to work on reuniting our people, or both communities together. I think these are the big challenges of Cyprus.
When you were saying referenda could be difficult, I mean, the votes that you mentioned internationally that have been difficult have often been where populist politicians play on the fears of the population. So I guess there needs to be two things present for that to happen. The fears need to be there, and perhaps in Cyprus they already are. Are the populist politicians who might play on those, are they there? Are they figures in Cypriot political life?
Yeah, they're very strong in both sides of the north and south. The centrist parties, as they call them, in the south make up about 40% of the vote, but they are very outspoken. One of them is the son of the former president of 2004, centrist or nationalist. I don't really know what you call them. They have strong viewpoints, and it's a similar thing in the north, where the more nationalist parties are also not supporting the solution. They are very outspoken, and they are difficult as well. We have them very much so. Doesn't everybody?
Well, there may be some blessed isles somewhere that are free of them. But what role do you think that the guarantor powers, so-called, Turkey, Greece, the United Kingdom, have in this?
In the referendums?
Well, in the larger process, I guess they wouldn't be the people playing the most direct role in the referenda, but in the process that might run up to one.
Yeah, there's a very first of all, it's behind the scenes, most of it. Turkey has traditionally always been controlling, I guess would be a word that could be used, the Turkish Cypriot part of the negotiations. Greece for many years has been out of the picture, but just at this crucial stage, they've reappeared. I don't think they are a positive, either Turkey or Greece are a positive momentum to an agreement, but they're there. Without them, we can't get an agreement. Without them, we can't get the security and guarantees. But if they sign up to it, then it will certainly be interesting to see how all the people of Cyprus see that, because then we'll have the two political leaders, the elected political leaders. We'll have Greece and Turkey supporting it, so that should be a major push to an acceptance, because there is a lot of people who listen to them, the guarantors I'm talking about, and it's basically telling people, I think, that this is the solution that we've all agreed. That wasn't really the case in 2004. There was a much more complicated picture. So I'd rather they weren't in the picture, but they are. And let's hope it's a positive thing in the end. Often, besides our North and South populist speakers who frighten people, we also get outspoken comments from Turkey and Greece, and that is not good for the momentum of the referendums either. We've had Erdogan making comments today. We've had Gojaz making comments today. They like to show their strength, their power, to make populist comments, essentially. And we're in the middle of crucial negotiations, and we don't need these power games.
Okay, final question, Dr. Anastasiou. Lots of people in this country would be quite surprised to see Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, turning up in Geneva and playing any role in the discussions about the future of Cyprus. Why is he there?
Well, he's there because the United Kingdom is a guarantor of the 1960 Cypriot Constitution. The UK, Greece and Turkey are still guarantors for Cyprus. Whether that's an active role, I would be very doubtful. They still have two bases in Cyprus, two British bases in Cyprus, two large British bases. They're in the south. They say they will give some of that territory back if there's a solution. How much Boris Johnson's contribution will be in the negotiations, that's a more difficult one. But it wasn't just Boris Johnson in Geneva. There was a very large diplomatic team from the UK, from Britain, who came to Geneva. So I guess there's a lot more to it than just Boris Johnson.
Well, that's probably a good thing. Dr. Nikos Anastasiou, thank you very much for talking us through those moves towards reunification in Cyprus. OK, so let's move on. Now, the Syrian army has warned Israel of repercussions after rockets struck a major military airbase outside Damascus. Afzal Ahmed has more on this and the rest of today's headlines.
Explosions were heard in the capital earlier today, and residents in the city's southwest suburbs saw a large plume of smoke rising from the area. Footage on social media showed flames leaping from parts of the Mazar military airport compound. The airport, just a few kilometers from Bashar al-Assad's presidential palace, had been a base used to fire rockets at former rebel-held areas in the suburbs of Damascus. The Israeli military had no immediate comment on the reported attack. The winner of December's presidential election in the Gambia says there is no need for President Yahya Jammeh to seek asylum in Nigeria, and he is confident direct talks can solve the crisis. Adama Barrow said he was confident he would be sworn in next week, despite his rival's refusal to give up power. Nigerian MPs voted to offer Jammeh asylum to help negotiations. Hamas security forces in Gaza have broken up a protest by thousands of people who demanded an end to electricity cuts. Stones were thrown, with officers firing in the air to disperse the crowd. Locals now get just 4 hours of power per day instead of 8-hour cycles. A vital plant was badly hit in fighting with Israel in 2014, but financial troubles and inter-Palestinian tensions have also contributed to the crisis. The visit to Israel by South Africa's main opposition leader has caused widespread outrage in the country. The ruling African National Congress Party has condemned the visit. The Democratic Alliance head's visit comes barely 4 days after President Jacob Zuma urged South Africans not to visit Israel unless the purpose of their visit is to foster peace building in the region. Zuma said that the people of Palestine continue to suffer in the rightful quest for self-determination. He said his ANC party will continue its ongoing solidarity and support for the just cause of the Palestinian people. Many South Africans, including the ruling ANC, have publicly expressed support for the Palestinian struggle against Israeli occupation. They believe what is happening to Palestinians is similar to what happened to them during decades of apartheid, which ended in 1994. In a statement, the DA said that his leader was visiting Israel and the Palestinian territories in order to listen and learn about the conflict firsthand.
Well, that's all we have time for on this part of the programme, but do rejoin us for the final part of the show. We'll be looking at the impending inauguration of Donald Trump, where minorities, especially Muslims and immigrants in Michigan, are fearful of a renewed wave of hate crimes. Do stay with us. Welcome back to the report. Now, many minorities, especially Muslims and immigrants, felt threatened by Donald Trump's words during the presidential campaign. In the days following his victory, the state of Michigan experienced a rise in hate crimes. As Trump's nomination approaches, some fear renewed waves of attacks. And we have this report.
The call to prayer resonates across Dearborn, a suburb of Detroit, where almost 50% of inhabitants are Muslim. Following the presidential election, attacks against those attending the largest mosque in America have multiplied.
There have been some women that have been assaulted because of their hijab. Remarks have been made to them. Some women have had their hijab pulled, and there has been some threatening talk to some of the women in our community.
In the 10 days after the election, nearly 900 cases of harassment and intimidation were recorded throughout the United States, a majority of the incidents happening in schools. States are working to track the increase in hate crimes, but false testimony and refusals to file a complaint means many cases never make it to court.
The events took place right after the election. Now, not saying that these things weren't happening before, but it was the spike that we got after the election. It's mainly targeting African Americans and our Latino population.
Michigan had the highest number of hate incidents among states in the Midwest in the immediate aftermath of Trump's victory.
That was the emotional reaction to the results. And I think, as I indicated, people were nervous, tense, uncertain, and that did go up. It followed, it appears, for a good 30 to 45 days. It seems to be coming down.
As president-elect, Donald Trump condemned these attacks and said he hoped to bring the country together. But at the same time, plans to press ahead with proposals that specifically target minorities, like the establishment of a Muslim registry and the deportation of millions of mainly Latino illegal immigrants.
Well, now joining me from Washington, D.C. to discuss this and the latest events in the run-up to Donald Trump's inauguration is David Smith, Washington correspondent for The Guardian. David, welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
How much of a sense of impending doom do you think there is amongst migrants and the Muslim community and other minorities as Trump comes up to his inauguration?
Probably an unprecedented sense, just compared with past presidents. Clearly, it's a radically different mood from when Barack Obama was inaugurated 8 years ago. But even compared to the likes of George W. Bush and others, I don't think there's ever been a candidate who used such inflammatory rhetoric, who launched his entire campaign 18 months ago. Talking about Mexicans being criminals and rapists and how he's going to build a wall on the border, and then, going on to make promises to deport illegal immigrants and to ban Muslims from the country. So, there's an extraordinary level of trepidation, great concern about how all this will play out, which has not really been abated by Trump's selections for his cabinet.
Well, I was going to say that we heard in that report a peak of some 900 incidents immediately after Trump's victory. Has that tailed off any? And is there any sign that Trump will kind of stand back from some of the rhetoric that he used on the campaign trail?
Have the number of attacks tailed off? I suppose yes, in terms of what's been publicly reported and has made the news. And I think, to be fair, from both sides of the political spectrum, measuring those kinds of attacks, saying that they're directly related to one candidate or another winning an election, can always be a fairly inexact science. Certainly there's been sort of less of that in the headlines lately, and in fact the dominant story in that area last week was actually about a Donald Trump supporter, a white man with a disability who was attacked in a live Facebook stream by a group of African Americans in Chicago. Nevertheless, there is great concern that, especially once Trump is elected, there'll be a feeling that these forces have been unleashed, that there's a sense of, we now have license to be bigoted and to turn against Americans who are non-white and don't fit that description. And sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Whether you think that Trump has, in fact, stood back from some of that rhetoric?
Maybe mildly. I think if he's asked outright and directly, are you a racist or are you anti-Muslim or whatever? Of course, he denies it. And as far as I remember, at his press conference on Wednesday, there were lots of other issues at the forefront, and that this was his first actual direct interaction with a group of journalists, a press conference since July last year, and he did not. I suppose we should be, should take sort of small comfort that he did not use it to go on the offensive with more anti-Muslim or anti-immigrant rhetoric. But judge him also by his actions, and we did have this week the Senate confirmation hearing for Jeff Sessions, the senator from Alabama, who is a
more or less open racist.
Yeah, well, again, he would obviously vehemently deny that, and so did some of his supporters at the hearing, and they argue that he has a strong record on civil rights, but there were plenty of critics too, including Cory Booker, a Democratic senator who became the first sitting senator ever to testify against a colleague at one of these hearings. There was also John Lewis, a congressman with a very distinguished record in the civil rights struggle, a protege of Martin Luther King, who marched at Selma. He also raised grave concerns over Sessions. The central argument was really that he will not provide justice for all Americans. That but in the past there were allegations that of racism, that he used the N-word, that he called a black colleague boy. So while Trump himself maybe has not been using such extreme rhetoric of late, the nomination of someone like Jeff Sessions suggests that Americans are right to be worried.
Let's just move on, David, to have a talk about some of the other issues that have been coming up during the run-up to the inauguration. I suppose most spectacularly in that press conference and around it, the whole question of Putin's relationship with the elections and with and the Russian state's relationship to Trump. I suppose one possible context for this might be there's an ongoing United States NATO deployment, huge deployment in Poland at the moment. It's pretty clear that the mainstream of foreign policy thinking in the United States is pretty antagonistic towards Russia. Do you think the whole stuff about the links with Russia is one way of making sure that Trump can't conceivably go down the path of being softer on Putin, even if he was minded to.
Yeah, it's been an extraordinary week in that whole policy discussion, and notably when you look at Trump's cabinet nominees, particularly James Mattis, the Defense Secretary, he was very clear that Russia is a major adversary, that he was out of step with Trump's discussion of moving closer to Putin, and some of the other cabinet nominees said similar things and really provided reassurance to the Senate, and Rex Tillerson, the nominee for Secretary of State, had a bumpy hearing, but he did say that we must observe the policy of supporting NATO allies and resisting aggression. Even Trump at one point was forced to say during his press conference, do you really think I'm going to be less tough than Hillary Clinton would have been on Russia? So, I mean, the whole thing is really mystifying, the way he has praised Putin repeatedly, and it just does seem out of step with U.S. foreign policy. And the take of Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, is that Putin, that Trump will eventually be forced to recognise reality that Russia has a very different set of values and is not ready to be an ally. And obviously the entire week was overshadowed by this dossier apparently put together by a former British intelligence agent, which had some rather salacious allegations about Trump, and at least gave one theory as to why he might be pro-Russia, because they have incriminating information about him. But all of it is very hard to be certain of.
What do you make, David, of the involvement of that Christopher Steele, of the former security services agent in Britain, in this? And indeed now the news that a former British ambassador was the person who spoke to John McCain in a conference in Canada, and then McCain immediately went back and reported those concerns to the security establishment in America. What do you make of the British role in this?
We did some reporting around that was interesting. I thought that a lot of Christopher Steele's colleagues were full of praise for him as a reliable man, not generally a cowboy who would just kind of make stuff up, but ultimately someone who was relying on his own sources in Moscow, and of course those might include people who are being misled or not entirely reliable themselves. I don't think it started out certainly as intending to be a British diplomatic intervention. It was more, this is somebody who, British intelligence is respected. It was somebody who had Russian links, and he was hired as an opposition researcher within the US for one of Trump's Republican opponents. But yes, the idea of a former British ambassador being involved is intriguing, and comes at a moment when Trump is actually very pro-British in his statements, and talking about meeting Theresa May and Britain being a great ally. I wouldn't read too much into it in terms of the British government or British diplomats actively involving against Trump. They seem to be more of a sort of independent operation, I think.
And standing back from the immediacy of these kind of sort of headline-grabbing revelations, there's been a lot of discussion among analysts about where Trump will end up on a sort of spectrum of foreign policy between kind of his own sort of maverick inclinations and the more settled view of the foreign policy elite in America. Taking the press conference and the appointments into account, where do you think we are on that spectrum with Trump?
The bottom line with Trump is that he's utterly unpredictable, and journalists who followed him all year at his rallies and interacted with him said, you know, only a fool would predict what he's actually going to do when he becomes president. As we've seen with his tweeting, he kind of shoots from the hip and seems to be all over the place. But what I suppose, you know, what some people might take hope from, I would guess, is that, you know, Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State, and James Mattis as Defense Secretary are relatively more stable, predictable people. I mean, even though Tillerson has no diplomatic experience, I hear from sources in Washington that he's, you know, relatively well regarded within the State Department, that, you know, they much prefer him to some of the choices Trump could have made. And, you know, he's worldly, he's well-traveled, he can find Kazakhstan on a map. And Mattis is pretty well respected also. And I think what all of that means is that Trump is surrounding himself with people who are sort of relatively experienced and therefore, you know, the foreign policy might be more conventional than had been feared. You know, Trump is the kind of guy who probably doesn't have much knowledge and depth himself, and therefore may lean on his team quite a lot, be willing to take their advice in a way that people say, you know, Ronald Reagan did. That's the optimistic version, of course. The pessimistic version is that Trump will be provoked by a terrorist attack or North Korea launching nuclear warheads, or, you know, somebody doing something to goad him into lashing out, and then he will do something, you know, highly irresponsible and inflammatory that triggers something we don't want to even think about.
David, what do you think about the analyses that are saying, well, okay, if he does end up down the more conventional end of the kind of geopolitical, military, strategic sort of frame of reference, that his economic protectionism may end up in a series of international conflicts by a different route, so to say?
Yes, certainly there's concerns over, you know, could there be a trade war? Could he, you know, provoke countries such as China, where he spent most of the campaign, you know, berating China and saying that they were exploiting America, that you know, America had sold out and was, you know, completely losing jobs, that China was fixing its currency and so on. Again, we're all, and this is one of the scariest things, really, we're all in the dark in terms of, you know, does he really mean it? What's he actually going to do about it? Is a lot of it just campaign rhetoric? I mean, we know there are some things that he has backed away from, such as prosecuting Hillary Clinton, and remember all the audience chants of lock her up, and it really seems he's not going to do that. So, but, you know, the hope of Barack Obama and others is that once Trump walks into that Oval Office and realizes what they describe as the awesome responsibility of the presidency, that, you know, reality will kick in, and advisors will say, well, but yes, if you make this move against China, then here are 10 consequences, and how we're going to deal with that. Again, you have to hope there are wise counsels. You have to hope that people saying, you know, don't start a trade war, you know, look what will happen. But you know, we really don't know what is going on inside Trump's brain, and that's perhaps the alarming thing.
Well, as you say, with that alarming thought, David Smith, a Washington correspondent at The Guardian, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it because that's all we've got time for on this episode of The Report. I want to thank all my guests on today's show, and to thank you for taking the time to watch. Now, do remember you can keep up with us on Twitter by following @IslamChannelCA and by using the hashtag #TheReport. But for now, we'll leave you with scenes from Paris, where protesters from Amnesty International gathered this morning to demand a presidential pardon for US whistleblower Edward Snowden. A banner and a balloon honouring the former NSA contractor, currently in exile in Russia, were attached to a miniature version of the Statue of Liberty that's in the French capital. Well, do rejoin us on the same time on Monday. But until then, Good night.
Eventually, the afternoon, my cousin came down. He's the caretaker of the mosque, and he saw something fishy going on. Like the Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's name on the window was scraped down.
All that I can say is just the reaction was just shocked. They were just shocked because of Kolbe. Kolbe is a quiet community, and the religions coexist very well here. Christians, Jews, Muslims, all of us, all the years. So I can put my head on the block that it's not any local person that did it.
Of people coming forward. We thank you because of this wonderful historic day, O God. This morning on this happened in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. We pray that everybody say. We believe that you will. We cannot be sure that we will be here in 2022. The state, this is the highest state election in our